Take it away then.
Great. Welcome everyone. My name is Tony Gioventri. I'm the Executive Director of the Condominium Homeowners Association for British Columbia. So our association, we provide educational resources, research documents, advisory support services, public seminars and education for strata councils, for strata lot owners, for tenants, for special needs providers, for property management companies, and contractors, and virtually anyone who has some sort of involvement with property that is strata titled in BC, that may be either residential, commercial, industrial, or mixed in some capacity. So, you know, in a big net, it captures a very specific industry that falls under the Strata Property Act and regulations, but also falls under the BC Human Rights Code, the Homeowner Protection Act, through BC Housing, through WorkSafe, through BC Safety Authority, or Technical Safety BC as it's called now, and any organization that has something to do with a regulatory function over property owners that are strata titled. So it's a pretty large net that captures quite a number of regulatory regimes as well as services to our members. The general topic of what we're going to obviously deal with is accommodation for individuals and accommodation for families where they need alterations, modifications to access to their strata lots, the internal structure of their strata lots, but also things like safety items within units, quality of climate control within units, and as well as access to common areas for buildings, which is a significantly difficult problem, especially as we have so many older buildings in the province. I'll do a little brief overview, different kinds of property. I'll do a few scenarios of the different types of access and alterations that we see that arise on a frequent basis. And then the steps are really quite simple on a remedy process and what the options are when there is a difficulty with a strata council or a property manager that are unwilling to be cooperative when special needs access are necessary. So Strata Corporation is a piece of titled property where it is a collective of multiple property holders that is filed within the Land Title Registry. Strata Corporation is created when the developer files a strata plan. And the strata plan is going to show two basic things. It's going to show the boundaries of each of the strata lots, so that's the apartments, or the townhouses, or the bare land properties, and it's going to show what is common property. So, you know, basic rule of thumb, everything that's within the boundary of a strata lot is responsibility of the owner. Everything that is outside of that boundary, that is either limited common property or common property, is the responsibility of the Strata Corporation for general maintenance, operation, and repair. We hear the word limited common property or exclusive use arise quite often, and all that is it's common property, such as a patio area, a balcony, an outside yard area, that has some exclusive benefits or allocations to one or more strata lots. But it's still common property, and it's still the responsibility of the strata. A very common scenario that we deal with, and we are in the process of creating a new access bulletin this summer, and as a research project to deal with a number of the human rights complaints and to deal with a number of the technical aspect details that people are having to struggle with. We have a new research guide that will be out later this summer that will pretty much provide a step-by-step guide on what the rights are of the parties, the resources, the obligations, and a basic step-by-step guide on how to go through this and manage the field of the alteration requests. Our most common request that we have has to deal with accessibility to main entries of buildings. It's the number one request. Many older buildings that do have elevators may have one or two steps at their front door areas, or they may not have a automatically activated door that allows for easy access to buildings. Both of those, if they don't cause undue hardship to the community, and the test of undue hardship defined by the Human Rights Tribunal really means an excessive disruption or an excessive cost per unit. And so both of those, if they don't cause an undue hardship, are a basic human right. So anyone requesting a ramp, for example, to be able to manage the 2 or 3 steps that's at the front of the building, and an alteration of the building to upgrade it so it's accessible, or someone who's requesting that there be an automatic door system installed for easy access to the building, both of those are generally awarded as requirements for access for people through the Human Rights Tribunal, as well as items like door buzzers and door entries. Are also human rights access items. Again, a common complaint, strata corporations for security try to set timers on their buildings so that between 10 p.m. at night and 8 in the morning, the front door access systems are not working or they're disabled. Again, a basic human right. So, you know, I think that those are the general exterior components that we deal with, very easily resolved. And again, if the strata corporation is not willing, or if there are barriers to getting that done, applications to the Human Rights Tribunal resolve those quickly. And there are sufficient decisions. There are sufficient decisions. There is some case law around this, basically ensuring the right of access for individuals to buildings. A modification of an elevator, if an elevator is not large enough to accommodate specific needs or services, that will probably fall under the characteristic of an undue hardship. It may require such a significant alteration to the structure of the building or the cost that it's simply not feasible. But the basic elements and fundamentals of doorways, access, automatic door openers, ramps on buildings, front entries, those things I think are the items that people can be assured of. The other common inquiry that we receive has to deal with access to the living spaces of each individual unit. So, you know, when we do a virtual walkthrough, when we go through a front entry of a door going into an apartment, the door width itself may not be sufficient. If it's a substantially older building, it could be a 28 or 29-inch doorway and may need to be a 34 or 36-inch doorway. That's a modification to the common property, and again, a reasonable alteration that can be requested. It's at the funding cost of the individual making the request or the parties making the application, but it is a reasonable request that the Strata Corporation is going to have a right to have to accommodate for an individual. As you move into a unit, you may deal with some structural changes of a unit. You may require the removal of hallway walls, which are structural. There are certainly upgrades that are required for access to any of the washroom facilities, for support bars, rails, changes to bathtubs, changes to toilets, access to sinks, access to cooking facilities, those types of issues. Most of those items are feasible within strata corporations, but they require the permission of strata corporations to be able to go forward, and rightly so. Oftentimes, heating, ventilation, mechanical services may be altered in units to accommodate individuals, and the strata corporation needs to be aware of what those are. They have an obligation to give permission or consent for those, but they also, it may also affect other systems within the building, so there has to be care as to how they're integrated into the building. So once you're into a unit, many of the types of alterations are necessary. You know, we're into a little bit of a funny phenomenon with our climate modifying the way it is, and in these extreme heat periods. And interior climate conditions are also a growing problem with respect to accommodation and access. Excessive heat requires some sort of air conditioning, and you know, we're in these beautiful high-rise buildings everywhere where the walls are all glass, and it's almost impossible to install a heat pump on the exterior of the building to be able to provide air conditioning for that unit. So again, there may be modifications required to the building exterior, the building envelope, the doorway, the window areas that may require some sort of facilitation. But you know, essentially, it's the requirement of the Strata Corporation is reasonable accommodation of requests from individuals. I can give you some examples. An example that occurred through Human Rights Code a number of years ago is with respect to an owner who had an extreme dust allergy within a unit and required to have all the carpets removed. The Strata Corporation has a bylaw that prohibits any hard surface floors and requires that all areas be carpeted. the Strata refused the alteration. The owner went to the Human Rights Tribunal, and it was interesting because the Strata was ordered to accommodate the individual on a conditional basis. So the accommodation was that the carpets could be removed. However, when the unit sold or transferred ownership to another party, carpets were going to have to be reinstalled back into the unit. I couldn't foresee that being quite as easy with any structural alterations to a building. Cosmetic or surface alterations, if they somehow impinge on the use of other owners within the property, could be conditions. But for the most part, there's an obligation to accommodate the requests of owners, accommodate the requests of individuals who are being hosted, who have special access requirements. A Strata Council doesn't have an option. They have an obligation to enforce the bylaws. They do have an obligation to act reasonably with respect to owners. So, depending on the type of modifications or alterations, there's certainly conditions that can happen. So let me walk you through a recent alteration where we assisted a Strata corporation and an owner. The owner had an injury. The owner is no longer fully mobile, and it required a number of alterations. So the first thing was a ramp had to be installed at the front entry because there is a single stair that made accessibility impossible. And the Strata Corporation had an adjacent ramp to the front step installed to code. These are not temporary. These are permanent code compliant installations. An automatic door was installed on the front door, which many of the people in the building were quite happy with because many of them are seniors struggling with the front door anyhow. So we have the obligation of the Strata to accommodate. The Strata did accommodate, did address each of these features. The elevators were accessible, and luckily in this building, the elevator buttons were low enough to be accessible for the individual as well. The doorway going into the Strata lot was not wide enough for comfortable entry and access. So the owner requested permission to increase the doorway size to 36 inches and to install an electronic door opener. Both of those were, permission was granted for both of those. And then modifications were made to the bathroom facilities in the kitchen area that required some minor alterations to the electrical, mechanical, and to the plumbing system. All of those were done fairly textbook in a relatively expedient period of time to accommodate the individual. In exchange for that, the Strata Corporation requested that the owner would sign an agreement and that they would be responsible for any costs associated with these alterations on a future basis. And that was the agreement that the Strata Corporation is entitled to request. That agreement was reviewed by legal counsel on behalf of the owner of the Strata lot, who was hosting the individual, and the repairs, the alterations were conducted, inspected, and that's moved along just perfectly. So, interesting side note to that, since a number of modifications have been done, a number of elderly owners in the building who are now using walkers for assistance for mobility are asking if they can have electronic door openers on their doors and increase their door width size as well. So there's been some real benefit that's kind of trickled down to everyone else from an unfortunate tragedy. However, the cost was significant. So the cost to the owner with respect to the redesign of the unit, the cost of the front door entry and the ramp was paid by the Strata Corporation as its common area. It was an upgrade covered by the Strata, but the cost to the unit itself, the doorway, and the modifications to the interior were close to $25,000. They did get a grant through the HAPPY program that comes through BC Housing, which was excellent, and it helped to cover a good portion of the cost, and the owner of the unit funded the balance of the cost. So, it was a fairly, routine process, and it went well because the individual who owns the unit, the individual who's residing there that's being accommodated, the parties communicated directly and clearly with the Strata Council and the property management right up front. Where we find that there are problems or conflicts, is where there's no communication with the strata management company or with the strata council. Individuals start undertaking alterations that have implications to the community, and problems arise, and then everybody has to backtrack. And that's where it becomes painful for everyone, because it's a slow process, it's costly, and a lot of delays occur as a result of that happening. Any questions yet? Everybody's muted, so I can't hear anything from.
Yeah, everybody's muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, is that Kirsten? Yeah, we can hear you.
So a question, obviously the costs, we would have to come down and it would be paid for by ourselves, but is there any way to avoid all the legal fees of getting them to accept it? I just went through this. I live in a building. I've lived there for 14 years. It was a pre-build. I did give them the heads up that in their drawings that the fitness facility, et cetera, was not accessible. I've been fighting it for 14 years. We finally went to Human Rights Tribunal because another person lives in the building who uses a chair as well. And we won, and we did it on our own. But most people, you know, you have to hire a lawyer and all these things just to get what you're rightfully, what's your right, which is there any way to avoid all that?
Yeah. There are two parts to avoiding that now. I think the Human Rights Tribunal are doing their best to support applicants without legal counsel, in the essence of and in the interest of that individuals who are applicants may already be prejudiced to start with. And so the tribunal are doing their best to assist individuals who do not have legal representation. But the other side of it is we have the Civil Resolution Tribunal, which is an online dispute process for strata corporations between owners, tenants, and occupants. And the tribunal is an excellent method of getting, and I've just lost my window, sorry guys. The tribunal is an excellent method of having strata corporations engaged if they are in a dispute where they're in a situation where they can't afford legal services or it's going to be overrun, because the tribunal has the ability to also look at other legislation, and the Human Rights Code is a perfect example of that. If an individual is making an application and there is any type of history or case precedence of a decision that's comparable to the tribunal, the Civil Resolution Tribunal can look at the human rights decision and say, in these circumstances, this was a decision and this is the order we're issuing. There is no legal representation with the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Parties are on their own. They can certainly consult a lawyer if they want to, but they can't be represented by a lawyer through the CRT. And a part of that is to ensure that it's a level playing field and that no one is being overburdened and prejudiced by the excessive financial costs. But the other side of it is to simplify the dispute and come up with decisions quicker. The decisions through the Civil Resolution Tribunal are binding in the same manner as a decision that comes from the Human Rights Tribunal. And they can award costs, they can award repairs, they can award, they can order the strata to perform specific functions or to stop doing specific functions. And the system is entirely online, which is hugely beneficial because it really reduces the need for any type of on-site communication. The only downside about the Civil Resolution Tribunal is that if it's absolutely necessary for a site review or a site visitation, they don't do those. But there is so much case law now and so many decisions that the tribunal rarely has that obligation. You know, I think tribunal, with the introduction of the tribunal 2 years ago for strata corporations, which is a mandatory process, it has changed significantly how this turns out.
Thank you. Jacques, you had a question there.
Yes, well, I have a question. The first question I have is, when you refer to a program that paid $25,000 towards the cost of adapting a unit, Is this a program where the Strata has to agree to an application to that for that funding, or can the tenant owner do it on his own without Strata being involved?
So the HAFI program is about individuals staying in their homes, about accessibility. It runs through BC Housing. It didn't fund all of the funds. It funded up to, I believe, up to $20,000 of funding, and it's based it on a means test system. But if these are just alterations that are happening to the interior of your space and don't require approval of the Strata Corporation, they're not involved in the application at all. If this is an alteration that's going to fund changes to the common area, again, you as the owner may make the application. They may simply request that you get some form of written consent from the Strata Corporation that you've been given permission to do this. So like the doorway, the main doorway, for example, would be probably the most common and likely event. Areas that are common area alterations, so things like recreation facilities, pools, change rooms, waste management facilities, not recreational, but they still need to be accessible by individuals, and front entries, foyers, mail facilities, elevator access, front door access, all of those classification areas that fall under a common expense of the corporation. If the Strata doesn't accommodate and either the Human Rights Tribunal or Civil Resolution Tribunal orders the accommodation, which is the most common thing that happens when the Strata doesn't do this voluntarily, this is a cost of the Strata Corporation, not of the individual applicant, because the Strata Corporation is required to make these accommodations in their common areas for all individuals. And we find in every circumstance where an accommodation has been made, there has been several people in every building who benefited from it, and they're quite glad it's there. It also adds to property value, and better property access and safer property access is beneficial for everyone. And you know, we advise Strata corporations every time there's a request, agree as wherever possible to the best possible conditions of the request, work with the parties to accommodate everyone, because as long as you're controlling what's being done as a Strata corporation, then you can control and predicate the cost. If you wait and let somebody file a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal or Civil Resolution Tribunal, what's going to happen is the orders are going to probably substantially inflate your costs that you could have avoided. So, you know, our encouragement everywhere possible, try to accommodate owners under every circumstance. City of Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, and BC Housing are going to be doing a study this summer, and it's going to be on accommodating individuals who want to do alterations to allow for air conditioners or heat pumps in spaces. And the study is going to be interesting because if heat pumps are going to be used, so a heat pump is basically a climatic conversion system that goes outside on a deck or a balcony. If they're going to be installed, there are a surprising number of buildings where it's just not technically possible. You know, buildings that have complete window wall systems that cover all the decks and the balconies, where do you run a pipe through? You know, how do you accommodate a heat pump? There are a significant number of limitations. So it will be interesting to see what the outcome of that study looks like.
On that issue, can I make just a brief comment? I just had a heat pump installed in my unit this past summer. It took 6 months for a city approval, and we were told by the city that they are extending almost on purpose the delays in order to discourage people from installing heat pumps because of the green city strategy.
Yeah, I know, it's a funny thing. They're about to change their opinion on that 180 degrees. So, you know, led by the City of Vancouver, you know, I think that they are, and in conjunction with BC Hydro, they're looking at basically a guide and a study as to how to allow for heat pumps. But we have also discovered that, you know, the heat pumps aren't necessarily the best solution depending on the nature. You know, we live in a very high seismic zone. How do you deal with, on a concrete balcony, how do you deal with securing a heat pump safely that doesn't create a risk for individuals in other areas? So, yeah, you're right. It's bizarre, the answer and the question we get back from the local government sometimes. Approvals also are a huge problem. I think, you know, the Strata Council dealing with your property, if one of the things that's very helpful is if you've made an application for alterations and you get a letter confirming that alterations will be permitted, and they can be subject to an agreement, subject to, you know, some consulting, approving drawings, building permits, etc. That letter that comes from the strata that provides that initial consent is really critical on expediting permits if they're necessary for owners within units and occupants within units. If they attempt to make applications for permits and don't have the consent letter from the Strata Corporation, the system almost grinds to a halt on them. And so the sequence of what you do first and then second is pretty critical. And getting a letter of consent, even conditional consent, so you can start the process through your local government is really critical. Yeah.
Thank you. I see Sherry has a question.
Hi. Hi there. I've got a couple of issues, but the first one I'll talk about is in my condo where I lived for the last 10 years, I can't, as a wheelchair user, use the backyard. And it's a beautiful backyard, but there's about 4 entry points, I guess, to the backyard and 9 steps. And I've thought about what to do about getting access, because I'm the only one who is a wheelchair user out of 60 owners. And I'm wondering about if I could get a grant for like a stair lift, right? Something
Right.
that would be out of the way that would fold up. And then if that was the case, is it then becoming, because it's attached to a stairwell, does it become the upkeep of the strata? That's if they go, you know, if it's accepted, like the maintenance part of it?
Right. So it, we have a bit of experience in this last 2 years with some stair lifts and outdoor areas. There is a condo and a strata in Summerland that last year had to install an outdoor stair lift to provide access to areas for individuals. They were only climbing 5 stairs, but the number of stairs is really irrelevant. It's the whole issue was the stair lift, what would be permitted, who would maintain and repair it. And it really came down to a negotiation between the Strata Corporation and the individual of the strata lot as to who was going to be responsible for it. Generally speaking, when a component is installed on common property, that component is common property and forms part of the responsibility of the strata. A strata corporation cannot make an owner responsible to maintain and repair common property. So if you have a stair lift that's installed, the stair lift itself will be the responsibility on the common area of the strata corporation to maintain and repair it. However, the strata could, as a condition of the installation, require that you're responsible for the costs associated with the annual maintenance, inspection, and repair of the stair lift units. Now, that's one side of it if you just get into an agreement with the strata on the front side. The back side is this a right of accessibility for use of common property, and would it form part of a claim through the Human Rights Tribunal or the Civil Resolution Tribunal? Possibly it could. And, does the strata have a duty to provide access to this area? I think it would be a hard test to probably breach. The strata doesn't always have to provide access to every area, as individuals have varied access throughout properties. But the stair lift itself may not be that expensive, and you may find that one of the tribunals would order the installation if the expense itself was reasonable and didn't cause any undue hardship for the strata corporation. So, that might be the test that would be applied. Unless it's necessary to get to a living space into an area of safety and refuge or ingress and egress out of a building on a common basis, I think you're going to have a hard time getting funding for a stair lift from one of the organizations that provides funding. You can certainly try, but again, it would start with a negotiation, I think, with your strata corporation, source out what the cost would be, and then determine, get somebody to look at it and say, so is this an area that I should have normal access to as part of my living space or my living facilities, and then determine if it's a fair enough requirement to be able to challenge whether the strata should pay for it or not. That is a bit of gray area. The strata in Summerland, who had the stair lift installed, they had it installed because there were only 2 points to get into the building. One was going down the ramp, which didn't meet code, by the way, to use an underground elevator, and the other was up the front stairs, which were 5 stairs, which clearly required a stair lift, and a ramp wasn't possible. So, that had to do with access to the living space. It didn't have to do with access to the outside spaces.
Okay, good. My other issue or question was about parking and parking stalls that are assigned. And I believe we've written back and forth a couple of years ago, because again, I've lived here this many years, and all of the wheelchair accessible parking stalls are all assigned to owners with a, that came with their suite. And,
right.
It's a building where I've asked everybody to, trade if they could, for use and all of that. So, and the Stratas helped me, and to no avail. People they covet their parking stalls, even though they're 10 steps away from mine, but they have the wider one that I require to deploy my ramp. So we've dealt with this, like you see it in the news all the time and that sort of thing. And it says here that the Strata, well, the owner of the building or developer, it's from the 90s, this building. So it's kind of stuck. Is there any more leeway or headway on the changes that are coming for these rules to allow or guidelines or some sort of work so that when an owner does come in that needs access, can have access?
There's so many conditions around each of these. If the parking stalls were assigned as limited common property, so limited common property is for exclusive use, but it's still common property. And I think one of the perspectives that people lose vision on is, as common property, while it's your exclusive use, it may not necessarily be your perpetual right. There may be conditions that require changes. There could be a structural condition in a building where a limited common property parking space may somehow be compromised. That would be no different than where you have special access parking spaces that have been allocated to individuals who may or may not necessarily need them. I would suggest that if the Strata Corporation has not been able to provide you with a special access parking space that meets a safe accommodation for you, that this would be a logical complaint to be filing with the Human Rights Tribunal. The tribunal does have the ability to order the Strata Corporation to provide you with a space, and they may be in a situation where they can order a modification of the parking or the parking allocations to ensure that you have provided space. There's a lot of individuals use the statement that the parking space came with my unit, therefore I'm entitled to it. That's not necessarily true in most cases. Very few of the parking allocations are actually limited common property. Most of them are common property, and most of them were just designated by a license from a developer that entitles a person to use that space. The designations, in fact, were never changed. They're still common property, and the tribunal would have the ability to order that those spaces be reallocated. What the individual was entitled to were a specific number of spaces. The only way that space could be actually assigned exclusively to them is if, when the strata plan was filed by the developer, they were limited common property on the strata plan, or if they were part of the strata lot as part of property boundaries and definitions. I think we'd want to look closely at your situation and find out really the history of how the parking was allocated, how it was managed, how people believe their claims were established, because that may answer the question quite straightforward.
Okay. Yeah, it says partial assignment document. So, yeah, basically it says a partial assignment to the Strata Corporation. So, well, that's good to know that I have another place to go with this, because it's 10 years and I still don't have parking that's
oh no, absolutely. Well, in my experience with Stratas, when you have larger parking spaces, is people tend to buy cars that fit their spaces. So the individuals who have the large parking spaces are the ones who drive the largest vehicles.
Right.
And and then they complain because they can't switch spaces because their vehicle's too large to fit anywhere else. When we're dealing with requirements for special access or facilities for individuals with access limitations, they are going to take precedence in these situations. And individuals need to just file a complaint with the HRT.
I will do that. Thank you very much.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Go ahead,
Yes.
Bonnie.
Yes, okay, I didn't know how this works. First of all, thank you very much, Tony. I would love to know how to reach you and get more information on. I'm in a situation in a Strata lot with the Strata Corporation of over 300 units, a high rise for over 20 years. And I have spoken to the Human Rights Tribunal, and they suggested filing, they said you could file as an individual or a group, and advise filing as an individual. Anyway, I haven't done that, but I've offered that as a potential motivation for the Strata Corporation to meet some needs of I don't know exactly how many wheelchair users there are, but there's a large number, and there's an aging population. So we've done a survey, and we need about 40 the external doors are all accessible, but the internal doors, there's many, many doors. So we don't have access, for example, to the garbage rooms. And so we've put that in motion, and I think we're going to meet some success with having the, for safety reasons and other reasons, having all the internal doors changed. But we also want to have the amenities to common areas within, and we've been reasonable in our demands, like changing rooms and stuff that people can use their own units aren't being requested, but we are requesting access to a pool, which is why many of us moved here, and has a lot of steps and would require an elevator, a chairlift, and a lift into the water as well. And the Strata Corporation is assuming that that is a change of appearance, and it would trump the right of access to those amenities, and would require a vote of 3/4 or something like that. So I'm curious what your opinion would be about that.
Change in use or appearance is something that they're correct, does require a 3/4 vote. However, it does not supersede an order that would come from either of the Human Rights Tribunal or the Civil Resolution Tribunal. When a Strata Corporation receives an order from any authority, and that includes the courts, they must comply with the order. And so that's one perspective and one way of looking at it. Providing access such as a chairlift or a pool area, it's a pool. Whether you have ladders, whether you have a chairlift, whatever you have, it's a pool area that's enabled to be facilitated service for the occupants of the buildings. Mm-hmm. If the Strata Corporation is not prepared to provide access, then I think you're right. I think you're probably going to have to file a human rights claim. Strata corporations try to use other means of deterring people from moving forward with some of the alterations.
Right.
But the reality is, a strata corporation is its own public. It is necessary that they meet the needs of their occupants who live in the building, and it's necessary with the HRT that they comply with this. I believe there actually may be some existing orders already with the Human Rights Tribunal with respects to the installation or modification of facilities for people. And so, you know, it's certainly worth looking at the decisions that are there and requesting that Strata Corporation provide some level of accommodation. You know, the other side
I
of
just
this
won this, sorry to interrupt, but we just had this for Human Rights Tribunal and we won.
Do you know what the case, do you know what the citation was through HRT?
Oof, no, I don't. Sorry. We went to tribunal.
No.
And,
Yeah, but Kirsten, this was a negotiated settlement. It was
yes,
not
it was
by the end of
negotiated.
the
You're right, Jack. But we still won.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
was
yeah,
that-
no, there is certainly evidence that the access to public facilities is a requirement. So, you know, having some of that, having some of that history to be able to provide to your strata, and if the strata doesn't agree, or they do things like try to set up roadblocks, it just simply solidifies your case when you make an application. That's one of the benefits for it when you're going through the Human Rights Tribunal. And I would just recommend that you do that. And the benefit of doing that is that rather than you coordinating with the corporation over as to who's going to pay for this, it's quite likely that the Human Rights Tribunal will order the Strata Corporation to install it and pay for it, which is you know, financially better for all of those who are users.
So you're recommending that I do file rather than wait until and see if they're going to agree with our requests.
Well, they may, if they agree with your request, you know, reasonable time period, if they agree with the request and all the parties can agree to how it's going to be installed, use, access, maintenance, you know, there are maintenance and servicing requirements. If everything can be agreed to by the parties, that's always the best solution. But if they don't agree, then file the complaint.
Okay.
But set a time schedule too. You know, I would be setting a time schedule of, you know, 60 or 90 days. If we can't reach an agreement, then we should then at that point you should probably consider it's time to file.
Okay.
Can I add something to some of the discussion happening now? It's very important when you negotiate these arrangements that you have on board the Strata Council, not the property manager, because it's the council who can bind the strata, not the property manager. And very often people think they have an agreement, but it's only with the property manager and it doesn't hold in the end.
Yeah, that's why I always refer to the Strata Council. You will want a written agreement with your Strata Corporation that has been addressed by your Strata Council, that shows up in the minutes of your Strata Council meetings, and the agreement is signed by the Strata Council.
Thank you. Bonnie, I'm just putting you back on mute. And I know Tabasum has a question.
Yes, hi. I wanted to know what is the procedure for Rick Hansen accessibility certification and the BC accessibility grant. I live in a condominium complex in Richmond, and I have been here since 9 years, and I have you know, never had a chance to find out all the information that I am listening to today, which is quite an eye-opener. So I want to know how I can get someone to come and do this, you know, inspection and tell me how I can make these modifications, because the modifications that I am considering are mainly in the common area. That is an automatic button for the entrance door to my building. And of course, automatic door button in the common area that goes to the swimming pool and the clubhouse and all those areas, because I'm not the only one who is in a wheelchair in this apartment complex. There is another gentleman, and there are several elderly people who could most definitely benefit from this. So, I want to stick my head out and do something about it.
Yeah, no, you're good for you. It certainly is an issue that we have really flagged in the past 2 years as we're dealing with people in communities that have accessibility issues, which is, why we're really focusing on an information guide for resources and the how-tos of how to manage all of these areas through this summer. With respect to the Rick Hansen certification and the BC Assistance Grant, I would be contacting those offices and foundations directly to find out what resources they provide, who they can provide for assistance, what the conditions are. If it's matters relating to your Strata corporation, your Strata council, you can email any one of our advisors, and so you can talk to one of our advisors with respect to how to manage negotiating with your Strata council and the documentation and negotiation. But each foundation and each funding partner who provides some level of service has a different structure of grants, a different set of conditions, different services that they provide, and it's a little bit of a sea of regulations to try and follow, but it requires you to basically address each one of them. With respect to public access in your buildings, though, if you require access to areas that there are not automatic doors, and it's not even just automatic doors, for many buildings, older buildings, even changing the door handles to lever handles that are easier to access for people is oftentimes sufficient enough. But just doing all of these types of upgrades are essential for buildings for access. So I'll give you, before we're done, I'll give you our website, and at any time anyone feel welcome to go to the website, look at the resources we have, but also you can contact one of our advisors. There's a link on the site, and they can help you navigate through some of the Strata issues that you're dealing with. And, yeah.
Because I'm suspecting that, as you just mentioned, I have contacted somebody at the Rick Hansen Accessibility Certification Program, and I'm going to be having a phone call interview with her on Monday afternoon, and I'm not sure, what to expect, but I'm sure she will be trying to assess what kind of modifications I am looking at.
Yeah.
Having said that, I am not expecting my Strata Council or my Strata Management Company to be very helpful in trying to make these modifications to the common area. And that is why I have proactively started talking to the other gentleman who lives in the same complex but a different building. And I have started talking to him so that, if there are more people who would be interested to support this, that Strata Council will definitely feel obligated to pay attention to what our needs are. I know it's going to be difficult because I've tried to bring this up in several AGMs, and my discussion has just been brushed aside because they don't want to deal with it. And I know it's going to be difficult, but I do want to do this.
Well, if you can get a small group of owners together to help with research, support, communication, and individually each of them speak to the Strata Council, and this is, don't just target owners who have some special needs regarding access or facilities. Get all owners in the building who are mindful about this and who are enlightened, who can support this. There'll be a lot of people in your building who think that this is a justice issue and that everyone does have the right of access. Get everybody, many people involved who are not on council as possible. Odds are you'll probably find you have 1 or 2 council members who are sympathetic, who are going to start taking up the cause, and it will, and it isn't just about your transformational needs, although those are the priority, but it's about the transformational needs of this community, so that
Right.
all of the facilities are accessible for everyone. And that does make a significant difference. One of the issues that I come up with, but one of the items that I find bewildering is many of these communities, after they've done all of these upgrades, it has a positive effect on property values.
Oh,
Because
yes, of course.
you suddenly have a building that is accessible, and everyone has the right of safe access to the
Mhm.
common facilities in their homes and their buildings. So,
Mhm.
I think that if the difficulty for the strata if they don't realize it is, if they don't do it voluntarily and take up the cause and meet the needs for everyone, they're going to find that they're going to be ordered to do it, and it's just going to be that much more costly for them.
Mhm.
And that's one of our goals over the coming year is hopefully we can encourage strata councils and strata corporations to be more open-minded and more progressive about
Mhm.
access to buildings, because it certainly makes a significant difference to the function of the community as well.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I do realize that. And it's quite surprising that other buildings in the same area, on the same street, that have been built around the same year are accessible. They have the automatic button to open the entrance door, but our condominium complex doesn't. And it's rather surprising to see that. I mean, I'm not sure why, why the builder didn't think about this.
No, and it's not that great an expense. Builders don't do these things just because of money. That's the only reason. But it's not that great an expense to modify a door opening system in a building.
Mhm.
Yeah, Jacques, I think Jacques had some comments.
I just wanted to add, because you mentioned that you spoke at numerous AGMs, but you don't have to wait for an AGM. Strata owners have the right to make representations to council. In our building, we at one point decided that the Strata Council was not listening to us, and so we started off a building petition. And we canvassed, very actively canvassed owners in the lobbies to get a petition before council to do some changes. And then we had an actual meeting with council where we said, listen, this is the number of owners who would like this done, so please do it. And they were basically forced to do it.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Well, in my own building, we're a newer building, so we have a number of upgrades, but we've still made a significant number of upgrades to accommodate people. Any other questions?
Can I make a general comment? I happen to be the president of the Strata Council where I live. And
Yes.
so we at Strata Council have had to deal with certain issues of this type. And of course, the fact that I'm on Strata Council as president adds a lot of weight to my representations to council when these matters come up. But we have in the past found that property managers, as a rule, generally, do not have a whole lot of sympathy for these requests for accessibility, because they, rightly or wrongly, figure that the ownership will not support that. So if you go before council, as I've said, with some support, either to a petition or, as you said, having a meeting of different owners who are sympathetic to your case, it basically sets aside what property management may have said to council and puts before council the real issue, which is, do we have a human rights issue that we're going to have to address in any event? So why go to a tribunal or to a court? Let's do it.
Yeah, no, you're true. You're absolutely right. And we do see through our office a number of circumstances where property managers will block applications by owners. We've actually encouraged owners who file human rights complaints over issues to name the property managers and the behavior that's taken place. And unfortunately, all they want is the matter resolved. But if we could get the property managers targeted as well who are being obstructive, it would help to change that portion of the industry as well. And it's unfortunate, but when somebody actively obstructs what is a human right, what is an access requirement, we have to address that part of the relationship as well, because it does create a substantial number of barriers for owners. Yeah. I think we're getting close to our time, Terry. So
Yep, pretty close. Can you?
We can do another. We can do another session. We have lots of work on our research project over the next, over the next 6 months, and so we're quite happy to do more sessions. I just wanted to say to everybody, if you would like assistance or service or resources, go to the website. It's choa.bc.ca.
I'm going to type
And from
into the chat box there,
choa.bc.ca.
So if everybody wants to click on the link, it is in your chat box there.
Yeah, and all the resources on the site are open to the public.
Awesome. All right, thank you guys so much. Or Tony, thank you so much, and thank you so much everybody for all your awesome questions. Tony, I will let you go because I know you're super busy. If everybody else wants to stay on and chat a little bit more about maybe some ideas, and feel free. I'll keep it open. But for now, Tony, thank you so much for taking this out of your time. And it's great. Very great information.
It's a pleasure. We'll do it again once our research bulletin is over. But if something comes up that's urgent, contact me and we can certainly set up a session.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Really?
Yes, Jacques.
Again, in my capacity as president of Strata Council, I have a bit of an advantage here, but it's very important if owners want to put something like this before their council, that they do their homework and get a good argument presented. Not just stand up and say, I want this, but do your homework, prepare whatever you've got as far as background from the CHOA or whatever, and then put it in a way that does not target only the people with disabilities. Most of those accommodations benefit anybody. And the way that I've put it and the way that others have put it is, listen, anybody who has a stroller, anybody who has a handful of grocery or whatever, needs the push button on this door. Don't you tell me I'm the only one that's going to use it. You know that's not right. So spread the benefit to as many owners as you can in your arguments, and it really adds a lot of weight to the council.
I agree. Yeah, and I was just reading the comments, and Kirsten mentioned that she recently won her claim with the human rights for installing automatic lift for the pool. That's awesome. That's amazing. I mean, we have a swimming pool in our condominium complex, and I've lived here almost 10 years, and I have not used that pool even a single day. Although I pay the strata fee for the upkeep and maintenance of the common area, but there are lots of places that I have not used because they are not accessible. So it's good to know that something like this can also be done.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Is Kirsten still online?
No, it doesn't look like it. She had a meeting at 1, so
I can give some background because I was involved in this thing with Kirsten, very on the sidelines. But in Kirsten's case, the very strong point that she put before the tribunal was that she had been requesting this specifically to council for years and had been denied by council decisions. And that added a tremendous amount of weight to her arguments before the tribunal. So if you are going to be going before the tribunal on these types of issues, which are, it's not because I cannot get into the building, it's because there are certain common amenities that I cannot use, then build your case, make sure that you have gone to council, make sure you have a documented refusal, and then go to the tribunal.
Okay. Yeah, good to know that. Well, I will first concentrate on automatic door buttons for the entrance to my building and the common area, and then perhaps look at other things and pursue them if needed. Because we have an outdoor pool, and looking at the weather here, it's just a couple of months that I can perhaps use those use the outdoor pool. So I'm not even sure if it is worthwhile getting through all that, getting into all that trouble, and going through all those hoops and trying to figure out to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot of interesting information there, though. It was, thank you. It was a great idea, though, for you, Tab, to get, the people in your building all involved, because, yeah, it affects everybody,
Yeah.
They say
So,
we're all temporarily able-bodied.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there are people with strollers and people with grocery bags, and we all encounter that problem of having to swipe the fob and then pull the door open and hold the door until you can enter the building. It's quite a bit of maneuvering, and so in order to get more support from the residents, and there are mostly owners in our condominium complex. What do you suggest? How do I go about doing that? Because everyone is busy with their lives. I mean, you meet them once in a while here and there and say a casual hello, but there's never time to carry out a proper conversation.
Well, like I said before, in our case, we basically had a petition going in the lobbies, and I just was there with a desk in front of me and a petition for people to sign. And the petition basically said that we want Strata Council to do the following, and then people could sign up. You don't need 100% ownership. You need enough support that when you stand before council, you can say, listen, I'm not the only one who wants this. There's enough people here that you ought to do something. But like I said,
Yeah.
it will really strengthen your case.
Right.
I was told initially when I first asked the button for the front door, the property manager, and that's why I made the comment about the property manager. The property manager told me, of course, you have to pay for this. And I said, excuse me, you have two strikes against you here. One, I'm a lawyer, and secondly, I deal with human rights. So don't tell me what I have to pay for. And then, we'll get back to you on this. But it shows the importance of having done your homework so you can speak with confidence when you speak to the property manager or to council and not get any BS from them.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't even talk to my property manager. I mean, he's simply a useless person that comes in, sits in that room, and I'm not sure what he does or what his role and function is, but I wouldn't even bother going there. I would probably just go directly to the Strata Council. And I know that they have a meeting every month, once a month, so I will find out what day they meet, and I will try and get some support from other tenants and owners, and also the other gentleman who is a wheelchair user, and probably join them at the meeting and present our case.
And you know that you have under the Strata Property Act, you have, as an owner, you have the right to have a hearing before council. And if you request that hearing, they must give you a written decision within 1 week of the meeting. That is the paper that you use if you have to go to CRT, to the CRT or to the Human Rights Tribunal. You will have a formal decision from council on your application.
Let me see what comes out with the Rick Hansen accessibility certification, and then I will take this further and go to the Strata Council and see what they have to say. Because if I can qualify for the grant through the BC Accessibility Grant, then since I will be bringing the money, Strata Council should not have any problem in agreeing or authorizing the modifications to common areas. But we'll take it one step at a time. Your input has been very useful, and I really thank you, Jacques, for telling me a lot of things that I was not even aware of. So Now I remember that I have a lawyer here in the peer group that I can talk to. Thank you.
Who's the president of Strata, so even better.
I know, that's even better.
I was wondering about, and I don't know if anybody knows much about co-ops, because, you know, some co-ops were built even so long ago that I was thinking of like changing doorknobs to lever handles, you know. But if it's a government funded co-op, you think that they would have to do it. I have been in co-ops where that isn't the case, so you know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I have never been able to, you know, find a co-op building, even when I was renting and looking for a permanent residence. So now I'm an owner, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah. I don't know. Anything else from anybody?
No, I just want to thank you.
Oh yeah, I'm glad to see some new faces. It's kind of nice for a change. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I guess we will we'll find Tony's last name on the. I want to be able to quote him. So.
Yeah, he should be listed on that website there if you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
Just a question on that. Terry,
Yes.
did Tony agree that he could be quoted for what he said during this? Because I'm not sure that that would be a proper thing to do.
I would, if you want to use anything that he said, then I would actually just send it message to me, and I will forward it on to him to get approval if you want to use anything in your letter or.
Okay, thanks, Doc.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, Terry, is this recording available for people who are not part of the peer group?
Yeah, I'll be putting it on YouTube, but
Okay.
it does take a while for that to happen. So it won't be available for probably quite some time. Well, what will happen is it ends up going up on my personal one because it takes so long for our work to get it up on the SCIBC channel. So but that being said, it also takes me a while as well. So anyways, if you're interested in the link right away, I usually send it out in our newsletter or in my newsletter. I have a virtual peer newsletter that I send out. But I'm kind of behind on that. So if you would like the link right away, I can send it to you personally, but you might just have to email me to remind me to send it.
Sure, I will, because the other gentleman in my condominium complex, he is not part of the peer group, and he would like to listen to everything that Tony just said.
Perfect. Yeah. Just send me an email to remind me to send it to you. That would be great. I'd appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank you as well, Terry, and I hope that you get some heat in your office soon because you're wearing all your winter clothes there.
I know. I'm like, well, I was prepared to head off to go pick up my son at school, number one. But also, I just felt like a bit of a chill today. It's pretty warm in my house, but in my office, for some reason, it's a little bit chilled. So, anyways.
Well, I was looking forward to seeing what color your hair are.
I know, yellow. It's yellow now.
All blonde.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye.